Hey friends and fictional folk, can you guess what this video is going to be about? Yes, this video is for Monster Week, an annual community event created and organized by Ginny D and Pointy Hat to bring together tabletop RPG creators on YouTube. And this year, the theme is dragons. While I do not consider myself to be exclusively a tabletop RPG creator, I do love the hobby as evidenced by the books on my shelves and the videos in my shorts section, and any chance to talk about storytelling and dragons is enough of an excuse for me to make a video on the topic. Because while the illustrious Pointy Hat may not care for dragons, I certainly do. But mine friends, I do not simply like dragons. I love dragons. I love wyverns and lindworms and leviathans galore. I love the Chinese long and the Japanese ryu, as well as the Korean imugi and miryu. And of course I love the subject of this year's Monster Week, tabletop RPG dragons. Yes, from the chromatic to the metallic to even the more esoteric, dragons are perhaps the most iconic aspect of more than a handful of tabletop RPGs, including the granddaddy of them all, Dungeons & Dragons. Few things feel better for either the game master or the players than having that final confrontation with a dragon in its lair at the end of a grueling dungeon. But despite how many different types of dragons there are in tabletop RPGs, filling every niche and trope that you can think of, one cannot simply throw a dragon into a game or story all willy-nilly. Sure, dragons are fun, but like any storytelling tool, they must be used deliberately. Now, am I saying you can't have an entire world where dragons fill every aspect of your biosphere? Of course not. The Monster Hunter franchise pulls off that very idea masterfully, with detailed ecologies and behaviors for each of the various wyverns, leviathans, and elder dragons you hunt. But that's just it. While the world of Monster Hunter is stuffed to the gills with dragons, they aren't thrown in there as just random encounters. Each one has a character all its own and a place in the world all its own. No one is going to mistake a Great Jagras for a Dodogama, even though they share the same in-game skeleton, because they are both unique parts of their environment. The developers didn't just slap in Dragon Model number 3 and call it a day, and neither should you. If you're going to put a dragon into your world, whether it be for a tabletop RPG, a book, a video game, or just for the heck of it, you should consider its place in your world and the role it plays in your story carefully. Luckily, we can break down how to do so in a numbered list. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, and subscribe as we go over the 6 ways to use dragons in your stories. Now, this list isn't from worst to best or best to worst, but rather from the least threatening to players and least important to the plot to the most threatening and or most important. And to start us off, we have the kind of dragons that are easily forgotten, but if handled right, can still be a valuable piece of world building. At number 6, we have the Nuisance Dragons. Nuisance dragons are the pests and vermin of their worlds. Often little more than scaly rats or pigeons clogging the cellars and streets of cities and towns, or the crawl spaces of caves and dungeons. Easily forgotten about unless they start to swarm. But how can such a small and unimportant dragon possibly contribute to our stories? Why, that's simple. They provide flavor. No, I don't mean flavor as in providing meals to hungry adventurers, though they can do that too, and if you want to know how to cook these types of dragons, you can check out my side channel You Can Certainly Fry, for all your monster meal needs. But in this case, I mean flavor as in contributing a bit of extra fantasy zing to your worlds and settings. Adding nuisance dragons as an everyday annoyance that no one is really fazed by any more than they would be a rat says a lot about what kind of story or setting you're in. The terrible terrors in How to Train Your Dragon are derpy little things that no one really takes seriously, nor do they impact the plot much if at all. But their constant presence as they scuttle about beneath the legs of bigger dragons illustrates to the audience more than words ever could how vibrant and diverse the dragon species are in the films. We don't just have big, scary dragons or sleek, sexy dragons. We also have annoying little idiot dragons gnawing at your food stores without a thought behind their giant eyes. They're charming in their derpiness and add to the tone and humor of the films wonderfully. But how can we implement them into our tabletop games, I hear you asking? Well, let's start where many adventuring parties begin. Level 1. Sure, you could send the players to clear out a nest of giant snakes or insects in the cellar of some tavern somewhere. But what if, instead, you reskin the vermin infesting the inn's basement to be a pack of lesser drakes? What if when building a dungeon, instead of putting a swarm of more common animals in a crawl space, you put a horde of tiny dragons with an ant-like hive mind, whose nest the party has a chance of disturbing? Doing this instantly transforms the world you're building from a standard fantasy land to one where even the everyday pests are strange to our earthly sensibilities. Now, of course, you can't just plop these dragons in for one quest and call it a day. I know the temptation is to use the entire monster manual for your campaigns, but sometimes less is more. Don't have nuisance dragons show up in one random basement and then never again. If you do, they aren't really a nuisance, they're just palette-swapped rats. Have at least a few be scurrying around every dungeon, or foraging for food during a back alley dealing your rogue is involved in. If you're going to put them in your world, you have to make them feel like they are a part of it, and not something you throw in one time and forget about. Another dragon which can be equally forgettable if just thrown in for a random encounter is number 5 on our list. Animal dragons. Animal dragons are the kind most often seen in the Monster Hunter franchise. They are parts of the natural biosphere of whatever environment you find yourself in, and actively interact with it as a natural part of it. Sticking with Monster Hunter as our example, instead of having packs of wolves chasing down large herbivores like Aptonos or Popos, you instead have packs of Jagresses or Ludroths. Instead of large cats like tigers stalking their prey through the jungle, they have Nargacugas. Similar to nuisance dragons, animal dragons fill the niche of making your world feel truly fantastical, but also grounded at the same time. An alien place that can still be understood if you only take the time to study it. And while I said before you can't just throw them in as a random encounter and forget about them, that doesn't mean you can't have your players fight or hunt these types of dragons during their adventures. Does your party need to forage for food? Have the ranger hunt down a dragon that fills the ecological niche of an elk. Are you trekking across the vast and empty plains of totally not New Zealand? Have a wyvern sail by overhead, and maybe even have it consider the party easy prey if you want to throw in a combat encounter? Are the farmer's sheeps being eaten in the middle of the night? Why have it be foxes or wolves when it could be a pack of drakes? And maybe those drakes are acting strangely, and their mouths are foaming with purple froth, which eventually leads the party to a tower, where a wizard is dumping their alchemical components into the nearby river without thinking about how it might affect the environment. These are the sorts of storytelling and gameplay opportunities afforded by animal dragons, and they can really get players or readers excited about the deeper ecology of your world. And as an extra sort of 5.5 on our list, you can also have either the nuisance dragons or the animal dragons serve as pets. Because the only thing cooler than a pirate with a parrot on their shoulder is a pirate with a dragon on their shoulder. This is also where many of the How to Train Your Dragon dragons exist, though their intelligence is almost high enough to be considered for our next tier of dragon, which is number 4, people dragons. People dragons are the kinds of dragons with language, culture, and even sometimes entire nations. They are as much a player on the political stage of the world as any other fantasy race. Most tabletop RPG dragons don't actually fall into this category. Yes, in many RPG cosmologies, there were once dragon kingdoms, but those were more like feudal slave states of other races with dragons ruling over them. What I'm referring to are dragons with societies mostly made up of other dragons. For examples of this type of dragon in media, you can look to stuff like Aragon or Wings of Fire. These dragons are perhaps the most varied in how they can be applied, because you can basically slot them into whatever role a human can fulfill. But you don't want to forget that they are in fact dragons. Any people dragons shouldn't just have people problems, but dragon problems too, such as fitting into buildings where other, smaller species are congregating in. People dragons are unique among fantasy races because they have distinctly inhuman bodies. Many pieces of fiction get around this by letting them shapeshift, but that can be kind of boring. If you give dragons their own societies, those societies should feel draconic, and if they have to try and fit into another society, it should be awkward. Whether it's in a book or a tabletop game, remember that dragons are usually pretty big, so if you want them to have territory, it's going to have to be big too. Or maybe it's not, and that's what's driving some of the conflict in your world. Now you may be wondering what can be more important or more impactful to a plot than a person dragon. Well, for that, we have to look to not just participants in the plot, but central drivers of the plot, with our number 3 entry on this list, Kaiju Dragons. Kaiju dragons are the towering forces of nature that threaten entire nations with their mere existence. They can be intelligent or animalistic in their thinking, but that aspect of them plays second fiddle to their sheer size and power. You can see this in Dungeons & Dragons most often with red dragons or dragon turtles. Nigh unstoppable engines of destruction that force adventurers to act because that giant thing over there is about to smash or incinerate something they care about. Or at least someone who is going to pay the adventurers to stop it.
Thanks for that. You'd have done the same for me.
Yeah.
Kaiju dragons are the sort that appear in classic folk tales such as St. George and the Dragon, and it is from these tales that we can learn how to make them feel unique. Because if you just set up a battle in an empty field and all the characters need to do is hit it enough times, then you aren't using a dragon, you're using a stat block. A kaiju dragon needs to be unbeatable by normal means. It should require research to find a chink in its armor like Smaug had, or a race against time to find the one thing that can kill it like a blessed blade. Now, of course, this isn't to say you can't just throw these things at your players out of the blue. Maybe they've been plumbing the depths of a dungeon for a specific artifact, only to find that it is part of the hoard of an ancient dragon. In this sort of scenario, you'll want to use the environment to really make the encounter memorable. Have there be interesting terrain like patches of slippery ice, or floating rocks for the dragon to fly behind, or stalactites hanging from the ceiling that the players or the dragon can knock down to deal damage. Dealing with a kaiju dragon should be an event, a boss battle even. But rarely are they the BBEG. No, that honor usually falls to our number 2 spot on the list, Sovereign Dragons. Sometimes for a story, you need an evil mastermind, or a ruthless dictator, or a crafty schemer. Someone whose role is to always be one step ahead of the heroes, and at the top of a power structure that the players need to climb or topple to face. Here, ironically not at the top of the list, stands the Sovereign Dragons. These dragons, perhaps best exemplified by D&D's Blue Dragons, are not just intelligent, but powerful. They act as ongoing antagonists, sometimes secret, sometimes not, sometimes a little bit of both. But ultimately, what makes Sovereign Dragons special for the purposes of storytelling and gameplay is the build-up. Players and readers alike will be on the edge of their seats, salivating for their chance to finally get that boss battle with a Sovereign Dragon, and punch them in their smug, scaly faces. They are the narrative carrot on a stick, the juicy bit of catharsis that you can tease those enjoying your story with, because so long as you build it up nice and slow, the eventual payoff is going to be glorious. The only hurdle is making them feel not just like an actual threat, but a smart one. These sorts of dragons take a lot of time to build up, and a lot of time behind the scenes crafting. Of all the dragons on this list, they are perhaps the most difficult to implement, because you don't have to just think up your BBEG's master plan, but make it make sense for a dragon to be doing. If you want a great example of this, check out The Legend of Vox Machina Season 1. Sure, everyone likes to talk about the Briarwoods, but that first big boss battle against the Blue Dragon once they discovered his treachery was peak D&D. Remember, a mastermind is great fun, a big monster is great fun, but putting those two together is even better fun. And speaking of great fun, that leads us to our final entry on our list of dragons that you can use in your stories and games. Ruling from on high at number 1 are Godly Dragons. Godly dragons are even more so forces of nature than kaiju dragons, and run a surprisingly wide range of power. You can have local manifestations of the environment, like in my homebrew setting of Torah, all the way up to creators of celestial bodies like in League of Legends with Aurelian Soul. Regardless of which you go with, godly dragons embody the full majesty of the draconic form, and are often the sort of dragons that heroes seek out for ancient wisdom or lost knowledge. These are the dragons you use when you really want to wow your audience and players with spectacle, and turn the high fantasy of your setting all the way up to 11. It's almost hard not to make these sorts of dragons stand out, just like it's hard not to make meeting any sort of deity stand out. So long as it is properly majestic, and most importantly, rare, you should be fine. Trying to go from dragon god to dragon god in rapid succession can sometimes cause them to blend together. Never set these sorts of dragons simply at the end of a level, but rather at the end of an entire dungeon or temple, preferably one themed around their godly domain. Like any dragon, you want to place and design them with purpose, never simply as just a big flying monster. Anytime you use an entry from this list, they should feel like dragons. A nebulous concept to be sure, but never a boring one. From the nuisances to the divine, dragons can play a role at any level of your story or game, and can add an incredible depth to them if used correctly. Hopefully this list will help you with implementing your own dragons into your worlds and stories, and I hope you enjoy the other videos posted for this year's Monster Week. I know I'm going to be watching all of them just to get as much dragon content in my brain as possible. But let me know some of your favorite ways you or another content creator have used dragons in fiction down in the comments section below. And while you're down there, be certain to do all those YouTube things, such as liking the video, sharing it, subscribing to the channel, and signing up for my Patreon if you want to see videos like this early, or get monthly recipes for your own tabletop RPG games. Also, check out the links in the description to pick up a copy of my book if you want to support me that way. This one doesn't have dragons in it, but the sequel does. Until next time,